Magandang araw po sa inyo lahat. I am Von Albert M. Sumergido, and today I am presenting my study on China's gray zone warfare in the South China Sea. In the remote reaches of the South China Sea, in the Spratly Island chain, China is creating land. To bolster its claims to the waters of the region, Beijing is pouring millions of metric tons of sand and concrete into submerged reefs, creating artificial islands. Island building is one of the most obvious of many actions ranging from propaganda to economic coercion and swarming fleets of fishing vessels for China to solidify its assertion of territorial and resource rights in the region. These actions, accordingly, is a powerful example of an approach being used by states with partial but still obvious revisionist intent. That is, states dissatisfied with the status quo and determined to change the vital aspects of the global distribution of power and influence in their favor. This increasingly significant form of rivalry and statecraft, which came to be known as gray zone warfare or gray zone strategy, has pervaded the study of security in recent years. On that note, this presentation aims to discuss and explain the concept of gray zones or gray zone strategies in order to better understand its origin and character. Likewise, this report will explain and illustrate how this strategy has been employed by China in pursuing their aggressive, revisionist, and gradualist campaign in bolstering their claims in the contested waters of the South China Sea, and subsequently to propose viable policy responses or strategic approaches that the government of the Philippines can implement to curb the national security impact of China's coercive but below the thresholds of war gray zone activities in the South China Sea. In light of that, this will be the sequence of my presentation. The primary objective of this study is to answer the question, is China pursuing a gray zone revisionism in the South China Sea? To answer this research question, the following will be necessary. Firstly, to define and determine the origin and character of gray zone warfare or strategy. Secondly, to explain and illustrate China's aggressive claims and efforts to solidify its hegemony in the South China Sea. And finally, to identify possible recommendations on policy, strategy, or capability that can help Philippine authorities to address China's gray zone warfare in the South China Sea. This study will argue that China is employing a gray zone warfare in the South China Sea in pursuit of their revisionist intent of tilting the global distribution of power and influence in their favor. This report further argues that to effectively curb the potency and negate the adverse national security impacts of China's revisionist gray zone campaign in the South China Sea, this would require a whole of government and whole of nation approach, wherein all instruments of national power shall be applied. So, what are gray zones? Or to be precise, what is a gray zone warfare or a gray zone strategy? Michael J. Mazar, in his seminal 2015 monograph entitled Mastering the Gray Zone, describes gray zone warfare or a gray zone strategy as an approach used by states with partial but still obvious revisionist intent. That is, states dissatisfied with the status quo and are determined to change vital aspects of the global distribution of power and influence in their favor. Mazar clarifies that states are unwilling to risk major escalation without outright military adventurism and are employing sequences of gradual steps to secure strategic leverage. These efforts accordingly remain below the threshold that would generate an equally aggressive international response. He added that states are employing classic salami slicing strategies, fortified a range of emerging gray area or unconventional techniques, from cyber attacks to information campaigns to energy diplomacy, among others. Mazar explains that these states maneuver in the ambiguous no man's land between peace and war, reflecting the sort of aggressive, persistent, determined campaigns characteristic of warfare, but without the overt use of military force. The author argues that China's gradual multi-instrumental strategies to amass a decisive legal foundation for its claims in the South China Sea, represents the leading example of this approach. Moreover, Massar suggests that large-scale operations in indistinct landscapes will be the dominant form of state-to-state rivalry in the coming decades. He further surmised that international rivalry may be characterized largely by campaigns which go today by a confusing array of names, like unconventional, hybrid, gradualist, nonlinear, or unrestricted warfare. However, Massar posed a caveat that gray zone approaches will not be the only form of emerging conflict. He argues that conventional or traditional warfare remains possible, although unlikely. Massar similarly contends that gray zone tactics are not entirely new. States currently have been using these kinds of approaches for centuries. The meat of Massar's monograph, however, lies in its assertions that three elements, a rising revisionist intent, a form of strategic gradualism, and the use of unconventional tools, are creating a new approach to the pursuit of aggressive aims and a new standard of conflict. The author expounds that based on the evidence from numerous sources, including ongoing campaigns by China and even Russia, suggests that gradual gray zone strategies may become the tool of choice for states wanting to reframe the global order of the 21st century. Another instructive literature in gray zone is the monograph Operating in the Gray Zone by an American strategist, Antonio J. Echeverria II. The author proposes changes in the U.S. military's campaign planning paradigm to address its current weaknesses exposed by the reemergence of gray zone challenges. Since gray zone conflicts occur below the threshold of conventional war, the premise of contemporary military campaign planning of dominating the battlefield primarily through kinetic means, accordingly, is hardly suitable. Hence, Echeverria suggests that there is a need for an updated planning model to address non-military and non-kinetic threats while carefully treading the line below full-scale war or decisive military campaigns. Echeverria, however, contends that other means of national power can be employed and exploited towards defined political objectives. He further asserts that to effectively address gray zone challenges, there must be a coordinated approach in the use of diplomatic, informational, military, and economic powers of the state. And likewise, there must also be a synchronization of efforts with other strategic partner or allies in order to generate a cohesive and more robust non-kinetic responses. It can be observed thus far that prior literature reviews on the concept of gray zone warfare are only viewed from a Western construct. It becomes apparent that there is that attempt to dichotomize war and peace, distinguish the use of military and non-military activities, or the employment of kinetic or non-kinetic means in warfare. However, from a classical Chinese military thinking, the use of non-kinetic or non-military means to achieve victory in war is the norm rather than the exception to the rule. Sun Tzu, for instance, in his influential work on the art of war, postulated that hence to fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. To break the will of the enemy requires a clever combination of direct and indirect methods of attack, but giving primary importance to the indirect method because this will ensure victory. Therefore, from the Chinese perspective, the quality of a wise and skillful leader is one that subdues the enemy's troops without any fighting, captures their cities without laying siege to them, and overthrows their kingdom without lengthy operations in the field. Building from Sun Tzu's concept of winning without fighting and the use of direct and indirect methods, two senior People's Liberation Army colonels, Qiao Ling and Wang Shangshui, published a book entitled Unrestricted Warfare in 1999. In their book, the two PLA officers synthesized their learnings from the 1991 Gulf War and proposed strategies and tactics on how China, a developing country then, with an inferior military establishment, can or may counter the technologically superior US military. Their fundamental premise was that in today's modern warfare, the principles of war have drastically changed. The authors argue that instead of using only one's armed forces to compel the enemy to submit to one's will, the new principle of warfare requires the employment of all means, including armed or non-armed forces, military and non-military, and lethal and non-lethal means to compel the enemy to accept one's interests. Further, the use of non-military means or non-war actions prompted the authors to call this new type of war as a warfare which transcends all boundaries and limits, or unrestricted warfare. The concept of unrestricted warfare has four key elements: the new concept of weapons, the expanded battle space, the new warriors, and the use of non-military war operations. The new concept of weapons presupposes that everything and anything can be used as a weapon, even ordinary things such as fishing vessels. The authors added that the traditional domains of war have expanded from the traditional air, land, and sea battlegrounds to other non-natural space, such as the invisible electromagnetic spectrum space or the cyberspace. On the other hand, with the expansion of the battle space, the new warriors are no longer confined to professional soldiers, following Mao Zedong's concept that every citizen is a soldier. Moreover, new warriors using modern weapons in an enlarged operational battle space results in the employment of new types of non-military war operations that would include trade wars, psychological warfare, or network warfare, among many others. However, critical to the understanding of China's aggressiveness vis-a-vis its intentions in the South China Sea would be a better understanding of China's grand strategy, particularly the notion of a China dream. This conception of a Chinese dream was thoroughly discussed and explained by Liu Mingfu in his best-selling book in 2015 entitled The China Dream. First published in Beijing in 2010, Liu's book created quite a stir in the US capital of Washington, D.C., as it described China's grand vision and long-term dream. Liu, a retired colonel in the PLA and a professor at China's National Defense University, argues that it has been China's dream for a century to become the world's leading nation. Accordingly, it is an aspiration of the Chinese people built upon the ideologies of three of its greatest leaders, Sun Yat-sen, Mao Zedong, and Deng Xiaoping. The author, however, seeks to contrast the desire to be a leading nation from a global hegemon like the US by advancing the concepts of a champion nation and a guiding nation. For Liu, a champion nation is the nation that emerged to be the strongest, most prosperous, and most influential nation among the competing great powers in the international order. On the other hand, a guiding nation is one that does not use conquest to spread civilization, nor use fear and intimidation to achieve its national interests. Liu contends that unlike the US hegemony, characterized by its desire to control the entire world, China's dream is to lead the world through peace and guidance, with no intention to conquer and absorb territory, that it wants to be a champion nation and also a guiding nation at the same time. But before China could reign and influence the world, it must lead and manage Asia first. Liu further asserts that China's journey as a leading nation is going to follow a fiercely competitive path against the current global hegemon, the US. Unsurprisingly, the foremost advocate of the China dream is Xi Jinping, the incumbent Chinese president. A recurring and consistent theme in all his public speeches, talks, correspondence, and instructions from November 2012 to June 2014, as compiled in the book The Governance of China, is the grand Chinese dream of achieving the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Accordingly, the realization of the China dream is anchored in the attainment of two centenary goals, as outlined during the 18th National Congress of the Communist Party of China. The two goals are to complete the building of a moderately prosperous society in all respects by the centenary of the CPC, and to build China into a modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, and harmonious by the centenary of the PRC. To attain these two centenary goals, she highlights two major ideals. First, socialism with Chinese characteristics, defined as the integration of the theory of scientific socialism and social development theories of Chinese history. And secondly, peaceful development, which is premised on the idea that China's rise will follow the path of peace. While Liu and Xi represents a peaceful journey towards the attainment of the China dream, Western scholar observers of China offers quite a contrasting perspective. For one, in his well-researched book, The 100 Years Marathon, Michael Pillsbury asserts that the primary long-term goal of China is to avenge a century of humiliation and bring back the lost glory and power of the Middle Kingdom. Pillsbury added that it is China's dream to replace the US as the economic, military, and political leader by year 2049, the 100th anniversary of the Communist Revolution. And that the South China Sea, accordingly, is a key component in attaining this China dream. The author further argues that the main goal of the PLA Navy in the South China Sea is to gain a strategic foothold and extend their influence as evidenced by their extensive island building activities and the increasing militarization of the artificial islands. On the other hand, focusing on the strategic competition in the South China Sea, Robert D. Kaplan's 2014 book, Asia's Cauldron, underscores the strategic importance of this geostrategic location for China as well as for other regional actors. Kaplan pointed out that China aspires for global hegemony. Taking strategic control of the South China Sea is paramount for three main reasons. Firstly, it is a critical sea line of communication, connecting the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific Ocean. Secondly, the South China Sea offers a rich and sustainable source of food and energy because of its marine diversity and potential hydrocarbon deposits. Thirdly, Kaplan believes that the Chinese treat the South China Sea as a domestic issue, as a blue water extension of Chinese territoriality. To undo their century of humiliation, it is imperative for China, therefore, that no foreign power exercises strategic control over this part of the region. At this point, we shall now examine official government and civilian sources on security and strategic policies that the Philippine government is currently adopting as a national security framework to address China's gray zone revisionism in the South China Sea. Under the administration of President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, the Philippine government has implemented three national security policies and trusts, namely the National Security Policy, the 2018 National Security Strategy, and the National Defense Strategy. These official documents, in particular the NSP and the NSS, reiterates and highlights the institutional definition of national security, declares the Philippine government's commitment to promote and advance the country's national interests, promote the combined, balanced, and effective use of the instrument of national power, namely the political, legal, diplomatic, informational, intelligence, economic, and military and law enforcement, and translates national security objectives and strategic lines of actions into defense and security goals and objectives. On the other hand, the NDS is anchored on the national security vision, policies, goals, and objectives, and priorities outlined in the NSP and the NSS. Moreover, it describes the planning and resourcing priorities of the defense establishment in line with the whole of government and whole of nation approaches advocated by the NSP. There is no better way of concluding this study than by presenting possible policy, strategy, or capability recommendations. There is one that is forwarded by Romel Cordova on how to effectively curb the potency and negate the adverse national security impacts of China's aggressive and revisionist campaign in the South China Sea, which this study fully subscribes to. In his thesis that was submitted in 2019 to the National Defense College of the Philippines, Colonel Cordova argues that in order to safeguard and protect core national security interests would require states to adopt a unified, balanced, and nuanced strategic framework. Colonel Cordova recommends a three-pronged whole of government and whole of nation approach to address the national security impacts of gray zone strategies while managing the Philippine-China relations. A hedging strategy at the systemic level, a maritime governance strategy at the state level, and a homeland security concept at the local level. To opt for a hedging strategy means that the Philippines should seek options to minimize the political, economic, and military risks of confrontation with China, and to maximize the political and economic benefits of China's peaceful rise. On the other hand, the author contends that in order to establish a robust maritime governance framework and mechanism is to ensure the synchronization and integration of efforts of all concerned national government agencies, national law enforcement agencies, and local government units relative to the conduct of law enforcement operations, maritime economic activities, and intelligence operations. While the establishment of a homeland security concept would require the implementation of national security policies at the local level and to integrate, synchronize, and ensure coordination of efforts of all concerned government instrumentalities relative to the conduct of law enforcement operations or maritime economic activities at the local level. The author added that said strategies are designed to achieve national goals, such as to safeguard and preserve national sovereignty and territorial integrity, develop a dynamic, inclusive, and sustainable economy, ensure maritime and airspace security, among others. Colonel Cordova further argues that to be effective against China's gray zone strategy, this three-pronged strategy should put premium not on the military instrument, but on the other instruments of national power, particularly the diplomatic, legal, law enforcement, informational, and economic instruments of the state. For my conclusion, China has indeed been flexing its muscles in the South China Sea, employing a gray zone strategy to support the revisionist and gradualist campaigns in bolstering their claims in these contested waters. Hence, they want to achieve their China dream. Although they are unwilling to risk major escalation and are operating below the thresholds of conventional war, China is evidently determined to change the global distribution of power and influence in their favor. China's aggressiveness, such as surely affects and adversely impacts on the region's peace and stability, and particularly threatens the national interest of small claimant states, most especially the Philippines, as one of the major actors in this dispute. To effectively curb the potency and negate the adversarial security impacts of China's aggressive revisionist campaign in the South China Sea, this would require the Philippines to adopt a unified, balanced, and a nuanced strategic framework. Hence, this study argued that a three-pronged whole of government and whole of nation approach is necessitated to address the disruptive impact of China's gray zone strategies on our national security while still managing our bilateral relations with them. A hedging strategy at the systemic level, a maritime governance strategy at the state level, and a homeland security concept at the local level. These strategic approaches are primarily designed to achieve vital national interests and goals, but more importantly, the three-pronged strategy will tap on all the instruments of national power, which in the end would be truly decisive in addressing China's gray zone strategy in the South China Sea. These are my references. There are no questions. Maraming salamat po at magandang araw sa inyo lahat.